And again, so can I just, I'm actually kind of embarrassed, guys. Which is that, so I own a production company, like commercial production house, and for the first few years of the company, we did like no color grading at all. And sometimes when I look back at some of the even like television commercials we did, and it's like, oh boy, that's still like pretty flat. Like we didn't do much with it, you know.
Mhm.
And then later on, we got real colorists to do things, and you know, now I would say our color's way better. But I never really dove into DaVinci, and you know, I still kind of am like, what's the good enough thing, you know, to do, you know, for where I am, and so I've fallen in love with the digital Bolex D16, and I'm like, okay, how do I start with this thing? Like, how do I make sure that I'm not taking like this beautiful camera and just like getting the worst possible result out of it because I'm too lazy to like
For sure.
learn some of the basics of coloring. So I would like to ask some questions of you guys today and see, you know, what if you can give us kind of like the best practice to start with, but then also I might have some other questions if we have time
Mhm.
to for people who are dumb like me, but who have been filmmakers our whole lives but never really learned color.
Yeah, I mean, I can't tell you what the best thing to do is. Sam probably will be able to tell you that, but I can kind of show you what I typically do and where I get it to be, good enough for
Sure.
what I kind of need here. Okay, so first thing that I would do with D16 footage is to run it through SlimRaw. And there's two reasons you want to do that. One of them because the files are going to be halved in size. And the other reason is that a mistake made it into the D16 firmware, which adds a bunch of blue into the shadows, which can be fixed by changing something in the metadata. So Eddie Barton, who came up with, who worked on the color for the D16, worked with the SlimRaw guys to make this happen. So basically, it's really
So
easy.
I'm sorry to interrupt really
Oh,
quickly.
please
So
do.
the firmware on the D16 has a bug in it basically that's just there forever.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bug. Some people like it, so
Got it. Okay.
It's interesting to me.
Maybe it's a bug, maybe it's not.
I honestly like got so accustomed to just once I got Slimraw always doing that, but I think I kind of wish I hadn't because if you look at like film scans, frequently, especially like tungsten stock films that are underexposed a little bit, kind of start frequently with like some blue in the shadows. So I think depending on the scene, if I were to go back when I still had my digital Bolex, like I might have actually kept the blue in, or at least like disabled that metadata fix for like darker scenes because I think it kind of gives you maybe um, a film like starting point depending on the scene. But for most cases, I think it's a really nice idea just to kind of fix it and get it over with.
Okay, cool. Cool. So Octavian, you first put it through Slim Raw, take out the blue by doing the
So make sure,
metadata.
so in SlimRaw, make sure that if you go into other options here, you have adjust digital Bolex these metadata checked. So just make sure this is on, because otherwise you're just going to be compressing your files and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
Then you just, choose your starting folder, choose where you want the files to end up, and then you just run it. You start job and walk away for a little while, come back when it's done.
Keep close attention to the Premiere CC compatibility checkbox. For the sake of this conversation, it seems like we're just going to be in Resolve, but for some people, they probably want to kind of edit in Premiere and then go to Resolve afterwards. So, but that does make it slow down some in terms of the render, I'm pretty sure.
Sure. And then there are animals like me who use Final Cut Pro 10 and love it. But yeah, we'll get to that later.
But yeah, but that's basically it for SlimRaw. You'll then have footage that looks exactly the same and then go from there. I noticed that you had your audio set up to AIF instead of WAV files. Is there a reason for that?
No, I don't think I intentionally set that. Maybe
I,
I
I
it is
can't I can't
it
remember, but Sam, do you remember? I vaguely remember as an issue with the AIF.
I've never done audio with the Digital X.
Yeah, no, I got to be honest. I haven't captured any audio yet either. Not yet. Even though it has beautiful preamps on it, and it's and it's got two of them, I haven't done it yet. So
yeah, but if you do, you may want to go into the wave option instead and go with that. I've never had an issue with that before, so that's
okay.
That is okay. So now we got our nicely slim rod D16 files, and we can open them up in Resolve. So starting up Resolve. I made the mistake of upgrading Forget again this morning, and of course it added a new tab because they keep adding stuff all the time. So if I'm a little bit slow and confused, that's probably why.
Oh, they just updated today.
Yeah, well, I don't know. They're going up to beta 10 this time around. It just seems it's getting a little bit silly, but
got it.
But I mean, I haven't had any issues with it crashing or anything. Is that your experience too, Sam? Or have you not?
I'm still on 16. I haven't messed around with any of the betas yet.
So let's start a new project, and we're just going to call it D16. Let's start it up. Puts you on a cut page, but go back to media so you can load up everything. So basically, I've just taken the footage that you sent me a little bit earlier, and here it is. So let's bring it all in. Is there anything in the audio files? Is it worth messing with them at all?
No, there's nothing in them. No mics plugged in.
Okay, so we'll just bring in the video then. There we go. There we go. So I'm basically just dragging them from the computer into the media pool.
Right. And so, I just dragged them by I was just been dragging in the whole folder, and it
recognizes. Oh yeah, you can definitely do that too, but since I'm skipping the audio files.
Of course, yeah.
Be a little bit easier. And what we're gonna do, just to make, okay, so two things right now. The project by default, so you can set this up globally, has it at 1920 by 1080. I typically do like to switch it to the D16 native 2048 by 1152, just so it's there. You have a bunch of other settings here that you might want to look through. They're pretty straightforward. One thing about Resolve is that it does have an amazing manual. So if you ever have any questions about a particular setting or how something works, the manual not only has the usual boring manually type stuff, but it actually has use cases where it tells you how you might be able to use the features that are there. Color management, I mean, I just leave everything where it is, YRGB and Rec 709. Camera raw, just leave everything as is.
So you don't go through and add the pre-LUT as the I'm sorry, go ahead.
I don't tend to put the input LUT here. You can, as you can see, I have two settings that I've set up for myself, one with no input LUT and one with. So, I mean, I don't see any problems to putting the input LUT on at this stage. Sam, do you?
No, I'd say I've experimented kind of with doing it a bunch of different ways, and there's really no issue doing that LUT from the start. But that's not to say that's the only way of working or the best way either.
Right. I've also had some occasionally had some weird behavior from Resolve between updates, doing it one way then the other. And I find that if you just have it in a node, that's pretty easy to deal with.
Okay.
It was often a case of just reloading the LUTs, and it was all fine after that, but still. Okay, so let's go without the LUT, without the input LUT, so we can just add it on the timeline in case people choose to go that route. So I'm going to save this. So I'm going to just select all of these now, and I'm going to make a new timeline using all of them, and we'll call it D16 grading created. And now we have our timeline here, and I'm going to open it now. So this will take us to the edit page, and this, I guess, where you can make all your cuts, your editing. I usually prefer color grading before I edit, just because this way you don't end up with a million small clips that you got to apply it to, though that's not hard either, and I'll show you how to do that as well.
Do you all know anybody who is actually cutting in Resolve these days?
Cutting Resolve.
You are? Okay.
It's really nice. And I mean, it's worked really well. I used to cut in Premiere and go from Resolve Premiere, but I just find that's not necessary anymore.
Yeah,
cool.
I agree.
I also find that with Fairlight built in, you can also do your audio really nicely after. And
there are just a few ways that Resolve varies from Premiere. Like, I think Premiere is probably a little bit lighter on the system sometimes than Resolve, but Resolve has a lot of ways to kind of mitigate that, between like optimized media, render caching, dropping the display resolution, and all that sort of stuff that you can kind of do to make it not that taxing on your system. And then when you output like simple checkboxes just to go back to the full res. So I really, at this point, and if you know kind of how to work with the confines of your system, like, I think.
And the most important thing, if it's slow and you've already done your color grading, is to click this button, which turns off the color grading for editing. Mm-hmm. That will speed things up a lot, depending.
Yeah. And for the most part, like, nothing in the color page should really slow down your computer that much, with the exception of like OFX plugins, and blurs, and then everything else is fairly low in terms of the amount of processing it adds to the signal. So I wouldn't.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Noise reduction as well.
So yeah. Okay, so let's go to the color page now. We have this first clip selected. So, you have your scopes, you have all of your controls here, you have your clips down here, and your image. So the first thing that I tend to do is I tend to set up my nodes. And so Option or Alt S will create a new node. So just give yourself a bunch. You can always erase the ones that you don't use after. But basically, your first node will be your input LUT. So this will be the BT709 to Bolex log. And then somewhere further down, usually 3 or 4 nodes down. So I'm just going to go through what I usually do. Obviously, things can be done a lot differently here. But then I put down Bolex log to Bolex color a little bit further down. And this will give you, your basic grade. But then there's a few things you got to remember. So you got to go back to the camera raw panel, which is right here, and change to the code using clip. Notice that the gamma is set up as sRGB. It should be Rec 709 for the LUT to work as it should. And I usually click highlight recovery because it helps sometimes. Sam can probably say a little bit more about that and how helpful it ultimately is for D16 footage. But this is your basic setup for the most part. I think something really good to do here is to label your nodes as well, just so you keep in mind what goes on in each one of them. So this will be, we'll call this log, and this one will be Bolex color. So now that you have the basic setup, you're going to want to start making some adjustments. The first thing that I do before I start doing anything in the nodes is go back to the camera raw panel. And here's where you should set your color temperature, your tint. And I usually also do exposure here, just like a quick 1, 2 to bring it around where we want it to be. But we might want to bring it up, let's say, I don't know, to here. Like that looks good to you. And then as far as the color temperature goes, I've been using a gray card lately just because it tends to be really helpful for this. I'm also very bad at nailing exposure, nailing colors, or not exposure, nailing color balance by eye, but you might be much better than me, so you might not have this kind of an issue. But basically here's where you kind of just fine tune it. You can use the scopes to kind of get an idea of where you should be. I'm obviously going a little bit too high here. But before doing all of that, let's go back to where we were, which was at 7,500. And let's do a basic setup that we can then use in future projects, so you don't have to do all of these steps all over again every single time you start over.
Well, that's cool.
So let's just label this exposure. So this is where we're going to do our exposure adjustments. What else do I do before this? Let's say we might have some color correction to do. Likely not, but it'll be there if we need it. And then I usually like adding a black point node where I just set the black point in, just because it's easier to kind of go back to that and fix it there. Then afterwards, I usually do a saturation node. And I also do a sharpening node. And maybe now's the point to kind of point out why we're doing things in this order rather than, why is saturation not before Bullock's color, same for sharpening. Well, the way to think about it is that when you apply a LUT to footage, it bakes in the transformation. So for example, if you happened to so if you went here, and let's say things were super overexposed, and you put in a Bullock's color LUT, and then that brings that then, well, let me actually just show you. So let's just overexpose this. Sorry, it's too overexposed. Let's say I go into here and we way overexpose this. Won't let me go way up. I really want to clip this. There we go. So we really clip this. Mm-hmm. Notice that if we go after Bullock's color, and now we try to bring back these highlights, notice how it's going to be clipped up top.
Yeah, they're just not there.
They're just not there anymore, because once you apply the LUT, you just get exactly what's in your what's going to be in your parade and nothing else. Everything on top and bottom is now cut and gone.
And it's okay at the start when you're going from the camera to Bullock's log, because obviously you're taking your entire image signal and compressing it down. But when you're expanding the contrast with the Bullock's color LUT and adding contrast, you're obviously going to be risking clipping the highlights or shadows a lot more.
Yeah, but so even if you do happen to notice that it's clipped, if you go back here in your exposure, notice that now when I move the highlights, I'm getting back all the information.
Right. Yeah.
That was missed. So this is just
and now as a colorist, Sam, are you like going back often to previous nodes to do things, or do you want to mostly be moving linearly?
No, I'm not necessarily working linearly. I definitely jump all over. My workflow is a little bit different than Octavian's, but I'll be happy to kind of detail that as
cool
later.
Yeah, would you add anything else in here, Sam, just for like a basic?
Well, so one thing that's kind of important to me, especially if, it depends on the type of project, but like if I have a project where I'm jumping around 100 shots or something, I want to make sure that any adjustments I make, I can roll, and they're like project-wide adjustments I want to make. Like, all right, I want everything to come up, a half stop of an exposure, or just to feel a little bit brighter. I want the adjustments I make to be something I can ripple across everything at the same time seamlessly without it being different. So like, for example, if I'm going to do that black point adjustment that you're talking about before the Bullock's color LUT, then it's going to have a different effect depending on what controls I use in node 2 on the exposure node. Mm-hmm. So if I'm just using gain then I know that like the bottom of my waveform isn't really going to move around at all. So the black point adjustments that I make in node 4 should feel about the same. But if I start, moving lift, gamma, gain, all of that, and kind of different amounts on every shot, then that black point node is going to have to be adjusted for every shot as well.
Yeah.
So to try and make the least amount of work for myself, I want to make sure that I'm doing adjustments in a way that are about the same on every shot, and just allow the overall like workflow to be simplified. And I can go into that a bit more when I show one of my ways of working.
Mm-hmm. Sounds good. Okay, shall we keep going?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks.
So once you've kind of got your general node structure, however you want to set it up, my recommendation is to go here and you go into Power Grade. You right click on here and you're going to go grab still. And what that's going to do is going to give you a power grade. And these ones go from project to project. So what you can do, for example, when we open up the next clip or another project altogether, all you got to do is click on this, click apply grade, and it gives us the whole node structure.
That's awesome.
How we put together and the camera raw stuff set up. So this basically just gives you a basic starting point, so you don't have to do all of these steps every single time you open up a new D16 project. But again, you can, of course, you can set up however you want, whatever you find most useful for your workflow in your nodes.
For sure. No, that's great.
But okay, let's go with the stuff that we have right now. So let's start by setting exposure a little bit. So Sam, I keep being a little bit stuck on this because I keep getting like, again, you could definitely use a professional opinion on this. Okay, some people use log controls while in log, but I've seen people use primary controls as well. Is it?
So when it comes to exposure, if you're starting with a log signal, the kind of easiest way is just offset.
Yeah.
And like
that's the same in primaries and the log controls, right?
Yeah, and I mean, I honestly don't really use the shadow and highlight control. Midtone, like the midtone in the log control is a total waste of time. I never touch it ever. Yeah. The shadow and highlight, I only use at the end, either before like my output LUT or just at the end of my node chain, node graph, just to kind of reel in the highlights or the shadows if they're clipping, and kind of just use it as a bit of a soft clip and add a bit of a toe or a shoulder to my curve. But I don't really ever use those to kind of control exposure per se.
Yeah, so basically, so we're just going to go up on offset to get our general exposure here to where we want it. Let's see, maybe around here. Sure, let's go with around here. So that basically just gives us a basic exposure setting. I sometimes also adjust highlights and shadows a little bit in this node. I don't know if that's a no-no, Sam, you tell me. But you can do some like slight adjustments if you find that you need them. Though these are mostly contrast, so maybe we won't play with them right now. And at this point, I typically go back to the raw panel to adjust color temperature, because now that we have the exposure where we want it, we can kind of better see if the color temperature needs adjustment. I think this could use a little bit. A little bit too much. Kind of going by the snow, and I know the snow is not really necessarily a good white point, but it seems to be bringing us where we kind of want to be. So see, we now kind of have it in the right ballpark. Now we can go to color correction, and here's where you'd go into your primaries. So just go into your primary wheels, and this is where you try to correct certain things. For example, you have a color in your highlights that you want to push out, or in your shadows, or you want to, adjust something. I'm just going to do a demonstration because the shot is really, I don't know, this seems very well balanced, so you don't need anything. But if you were to need something, for example, you had wanted to push, you had to maybe pull some yellow out of highlights, you would pull it towards blue until you got it where you wanted it to be. Or, if you had a little bit of blue in shadows, for example, you'd pull those a little bit towards yellow, and that would help correct what you're trying to, that would help you correct the issue. Again, there are no issues in the shot, so there's nothing that we necessarily need to do here. Does that make sense? So I'd say this isn't a point where if you wanted to add a look to your footage, this wouldn't be the point where you would do it. This would just be to correct an issue that you're seeing, so you get a nice, consistent image throughout all of your clips. The black point, I typically adjust that in log, and I typically just adjust that by moving the shadow hunter up and down and kind of get it where you want it to be. And then we're at Bolex color. Sam, do you usually have a contrast node in here too? Or do you do that after you go to Bolex color?
Yeah, I'd say I usually do.
Yeah, so be before Bolex color. So we'll throw it in here.
Yeah.
So you can add a contrast node in here as well. And your contrast controls are, well, either you can do the highlights and the shadows until you get your contrast where you want it to be. So that's one option. We can just pull the gain up to where we want it, and then we can pull the shadows down to where we want it.
So how are you, I guess, sorry if this is a dumb question, but why are you doing color correction prior to putting Bolex color on there? Isn't that going to just undo your color correction?
Well, it's so, look, think of LUTs this way. Let's take one color as an input and give you another one as an output, right? So color, luminosity, and so on. So you should do all of your correction before that goes on, because that LUT assumes that you've done all of your corrections and you're just kind of putting a finishing look on it. Does that make sense? So if you input something with it that has problems, it's going to output those problems again for you.
Got it. Okay.
Detecting correct colors and transforms them into, the correct other colors on the other part. And keep in mind that what you are actually seeing here in this is something that has a Bolex color LUT applied to it. Because if you just want to see what's going on in this node, and this node alone, before anything else is done to it, you just click highlight. And this just shows you up to this node and nothing else.
Got it. And so you're always looking, or you're usually looking at the last node.
Yes.
Okay. Got it.
Unless you want to do it otherwise. So, this is important if you're doing masking and so on, obviously, because you want to.
But so that's kind of my point though. So if I'm adjusting, if I'm taking, green out of the shadows or something, then I'm actually taking green out of the shadows because I'm seeing it at the end of my whole chain here. And so, okay.
So they're both like technical and creative LUTs. And so the Bolex color and the Bolex log LUT that we have in this workflow here are technical transformations, not like creative transformations. But if you see people online selling their LUT packs, like those are looks, those are creative looks and LUTs, and have no technical use. But these are created specifically based around like the internal color science and primaries and such of the Bolex's sensor to make sure that it has a proper signal chain and flow, more so than any creative effect.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you, Octavian. Is that what do you do from here?
So basically, once you've kind of set your contrast, so you can do the contrast either by doing your primaries, or you can just go down here, what is the contrast now? Did they change this recently? Looks like
yeah, Resolve 17. They kind of changed.
yeah, it's somewhere.
Is
It's a contrast now.
sorry, go back.
Yeah.
There it is.
There it is. It's up top now. Got it. So you have your contrast control right here, so you can get some contrast going, and you can also adjust your pivot, and really kind of get it in where you want it to be.
Cool.
But yeah, that's it. I wouldn't even do anything because the contrast is kind of nice as it is. So messing around with it too much. I would do my saturation after Bolex color. I just find that it works a little bit better that way. So if you want to push in a little bit of saturation, you can do it at this stage. And the other thing that I do that I found works really well is use a sharpening technique that's actually also in the manual. So one cool thing about Resolve is that it allows you to change the color space that each node functions in. But basically all that this does is that it changes how the controls act. So you right click on your node, then you can go to color space. And what I do for sharpening is I select YUV. And the reason that I select YUV is because I typically just want to sharpen the Luma channel. I don't want to touch the chroma channel. I used to first split it and then put it back together, but I realized that's dumb because this control is here and it's really useful. Because if you change to YUV, what happens now, if you bring up your sharpening panel here, so we're going to go to sharpen, and then you ungang your RGB here. R now controls Y, so it's just going to sharpen the Luma. So if we click here, we can see what this is doing. And now I'm going to, where is that thing? There we go. So we click here and also click here. So this is going to give you the changes. Wait, it's not doing it. Oh, sorry, I clicked the wrong one. I wanted AB. Okay. So see, now you can see what it's actually doing when it's sharpening.
I see. And why do you like sharpening? What is that doing for you? Or is that just what everybody, like all the cool kids do?
It really depends whether you want to sharpen your footage a bit or not. Like, it's not necessarily doing anything. But for example, I use two kinds of lenses, let's say, in a project. And there's, a noticeable difference in sharpness for some reason between the two. Or I want to highlight someone's eyes in a particular case better. I find that, again, it's an aesthetic choice. It's not something you have to do.
Totally. Yeah.
Like that. But I just find this the neat thing that you can do.
No, that's cool.
Or, I couldn't find a matching 50B speed for my set, and I had to get an Illumina, and it's a little bit softer around the edges or something like that. You want to make it all consistent.
Yeah, this looks way better than what I did already.
I don't know. What you posted still looks really good. So,
oh, thanks.
But that's basically it. And now let's say you have a bunch of scenes and you want them all done the same way. You can go into stills. So the difference between power grade and stills are that stills stick to your project. They don't travel across projects. So you go like we did for the power grade and you grab this still. Yeah. And then you go to your next one, apply your grade.
And then you can go into the individual ones and tweak them and without affecting the other ones. Is there a way to have one node that is stays linked to itself in other spots?
Yeah.
Sam, is that possible? I know there
are a few ways you could go about doing this. So the first way would be to group your shots, and I can show you that in my timeline. And then the other way is there are shared nodes, which I don't use a ton. They work all right. The only thing is that there's no way to map them to a panel, so for me they're just a bit slower. But those shared nodes are maybe the most straightforward way of having one node that is uniform across an entire project.
Thank you so much, both of you, by the way. And I hope that, this benefits other folks too. Thank you.
For sure. So, okay, I just kind of, they're not your clips, Zach, but just kind
Of
of a
course,
few
yeah.
clips from a project years past. And right now, they are straight clips. I haven't done anything color-wise with them. And I guess I just wanted to demo a few ways to handle them. I think one thing I see in the digital bullets group is there's like this one right way of doing things, which I kind of disagree with. As a colorist, I think like there are objective ways of doing things, but it's also subjective. Like I take a different approach for different projects, and there's not always going to be like one right way. So I'll show you, I guess, a traditional way of setting up digital bullet stuff, as well as ways that you could kind of get a bit more creative with it, and you might see some slightly different results. But so I mean, I guess you guys are all familiar with kind of doing that 3D input lookup table, um, workflow that we talked about, and that works well. But in addition to that, kind of in terms of the grouping thing, something we could do instead would be take all of our shots. Let me just reset this. And if we create a new group, which is called group one, you get some additional parameters and ways that you can control it. So you have your group pre-clip, then the clip, and the post-clip. And so the group pre-clip allows you to make adjustments across the entire group before any individual clip adjustments. And then post-clip allows you to make adjustments across the entire group after the individual clip adjustments. So that can be a nice way of working if maybe you're mixing media and you have a lot of digital bullet stuff that you want to use that LUT with. You can group it, and that way, if you have other footage from another camera that has to be mixed in, it doesn't have to be at the timeline level or like the color management level that I was showing you.
And you can
Correct.
group it non-contiguous clips. Like you can group ones that are
Correct.
throughout your timeline. Oh, that's
Yeah.
cool.
And
Okay.
once you like add that group, you can say like add into current group or add into new group, remove from group. And then you can even kind of go into your lightbox and you'll see the different groups that you have here and kind of can, if you want, sort just by the group rather than every clip all at once.
Cool.
But so let's say like, let me throw on the Bullux log LUT here and then Bullux LUT or the Bullux color LUT after. And then in between on all these, they both have the log LUT in the group ahead of time. So if I disable that, it's going to disable it across the whole board. And then the Bullux color LUT after the fact. I'm not going to see it on anything. And you can make your individual adjustments from shot to shot. So that can be a nice way of working.
So wait, but if you were to go to the middle of that one right there, you would be affecting all the clips. But if you go clip by clip, they'll still be part of that group. So the pre and post will still apply, but individually you can treat them separately. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. So anything that's just at the clip level is for that individual clip. Whereas if it's
the group is only for pre and post.
Yeah, and that will apply across the entire group. But the normal clip is just that one clip.
Got it. Okay.
Cool. And so that can be a really nice way of working. The other thing I was talking about was shared nodes, which in order to do that, you have to, let's just like make a little contrast adjustment, whatever. It's ugly, but just for the sake of example. And then you save it as a shared node and it'll automatically lock itself. So if you want to make any further changes, you have to unlock it. But then if I want to add another node, I can see that shared node here and it'll apply it again. And,
got it.
If I make any adjustments, it'll do it to both of them.
That's cool.
So that can be a nice way. And then in terms of kind of doing that quickly across an entire timeline, if instead of just like add serial, you can append a node at the end. And so that means it'll always add the new node at the very end of the signal chain for every single clip if you append it, and then add that shared node. Does that make sense?
No, I'm sorry. So you're saying
So,
because the clip is part of a group, it'll add that at the end to all of the clips?
no, so this is unrelated to the group. But
Okay.
I'm saying if just at the end you want to make a minus magenta adjustment to all of the clips,
Yes.
then if you want to add one node at the end, that's the same. What I would do is append a clip, append a node, which is a
Yeah.
separate command from add serial. That way, append always adds it to the very end,
Got it.
and then kind of save that as a shared node. And if I want, I could like grab a still of this one node right here, and I can say append node graph, and it'll always apply that as an additional
Okay.
node to that.
Cool. So I could just select all the clips and just append that node to them all.
Yeah. So a few
Okay.
ways of kind of doing the same thing, but just wanted
Yeah,
to
yeah,
kind
yeah.
of that.
No, that's super helpful. Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to remove these all from the group and then kind of just show some other ideas. So the other thing is that Resolve knows how to interpret anything that's raw, like automatically. Whatever you set this to, it can kind of conform to. So if you set it to linear or Rec 709, it like knows automatically how to make those proper adjustments, which allows you to do a lot more than just Bolex log. So for example, if I wanted to work from a Alexa log C starting point, which I do because I work with log C a lot, and it's comfortable, then I see my color space and gamma here, and if I set those in the color space transform, I can jump straight to that log C pretty seamlessly. And it's going to be a little bit different than Bolex log, but I found that Alexa behaves fairly similarly to the Bolex. It just has more dynamic range. So you can apply a lot of like the same LUTs. They just have a bit more contrast that you need to remove.
So I just to be clear, where did you change this color space? Just in the settings for the project?
So for in the camera tab, I set the color space and gamma for that individual clip, and then
Right.
I did the color space transform to a different space that I like working in more. Because while Bolex log is what's designed for the camera, it's not supported by Blackmagic. Like there's no support for Bolex log in any technical way. Like you're not going to see Bolex log in any menus anywhere, but you will see all these others. So
okay, so you do color space transform as a node. That's what you've done.
yeah, in this
Okay, so
example.
yeah, but what? So okay, just so that I understand, though, that's a specific thing that you can do with a node is you can transform the color space in the middle of wherever you are.
Yeah, and there's a lot that you can do in these different color spaces, kind of like Octavian was showing with the YUV sharpening.
Got it.
And
so
then
Sam, do you find any use for that LUT that we had to go from Bolex log to linear and then to log C?
I honestly haven't used that LUT. I don't think the only Bolex LUTs I have, well, somebody made one that goes to linear XYZ.
Yeah,
Okay, that one. I'd use that a little bit, but this color space transform way, I'd rather avoid using a LUT just because it.
I mean, I think that LUT, the idea was that you can still have the other stuff that Rec 709 to Bolex log provides and still be able to go into log C. So there's some corrections that it does right on top of the.
I'm not entirely sure. I'd have to.
And Sam, and I'm sorry if I missed this, but don't we still have, didn't you set up this project to begin with a 3D LUT originally, or no?
I did, but then I disabled that. That was just for.
You disabled it. Fair enough. Okay, cool. Got it.
And so, like, another thing is that your camera sees light in linear. humans, like gamma 2.4 is something for us to be able to kind of interpret light in a way more closely to how our eyes do, but our camera sees light linearly. And something that's useful about that is linear is a very like known color space, and so if we wanted, we could jump straight to linear, and the benefit of that would be, so just to be clear, what I did was interpret it now as linear, and I removed that transformation to log C. So now we are just in linear gamma. That's it. But ISO is sometimes also called gain because gain is the exact same operation as changing your ISO. So if you are in linear, just like your camera sees, and you make adjustments to gain, that is the same as changing your exposure in camera. And so as you can see, like, we're still in linear, but if I, one second, if I transform from linear to 2.4, you'll notice that these adjustments to gain feel pretty natural to the way like an aperture might work.
Yeah.
So that's one thing that I like doing, or moving the ball in gain is pretty much the same as white balance if you're working in linear. So there's just some different ways that you can go about doing things that give you and open up new doors in terms of the technical. But so that's, I guess, a bit of a primer. But in terms of my actual kind of workflow, I work with a fixed node structure that I will show right here. And it might look like a lot of nodes, but it makes our life easier because everything has its place. So let me just go back to Rec 709 for both of these. And we'll start by using that Bolex log LUT, just so it's a workflow that everybody's familiar with. So now we're in Bolex log, and I'll kind of walk us through this from start to finish. And there's a reason they're all in the order they are. So I guess the one I'll start with is node number 7 here, which is kind of our curve or our like film print emulation or whatever our like base of our look is, the amount of contrast that we want to add, I do at the end, because then everything in the entire project, if it can have that same amount of contrast added to it, and if across the entire board of the project you're like, maybe this is a bit too contrasty, that adjustment is in the same node for every single clip. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I'll add that Bolex log to Bolex color here. Good starting point. And then the next place I would go would be after my log LUT. And this is where I'm going to make any exposure adjustments. So I usually would do that in offset.
Okay.
And if we're looking at the waveform, that behaves also pretty similarly to like a camera's aperture. And then if I want to kind of correct any like white balance issues or whatever, like kind of correct the clip, I also sometimes do that here in offset. And so like this is obviously so yellow. You can make camera raw adjustments, and obviously those are going to be like the most mathematically accurate way of doing so. But for me, I don't always like working that way, because if a clip reoccurs later on in the timeline, when I make those camera adjustments to that one instance of the clip, it affects all instances of the clip.
Got it. Instead of just doing it in the node for that clip.
Yeah. So it just, yeah, when you do it in the camera tab, it locks you in for that clip every time it's ever in that one timeline, which many times it's only going to be in the timeline once. But other times, if you're in an interview, you know, you might be cutting back and forth, and maybe, you know, a cloud comes by the window, and for one part of the interview, you're going to want to change your white balance for that one instance. But now it just did it to every single time that clip is in the timeline. So kind of using offset to balance sometimes works well for me. Here, I'll just push it a little bit more blue. And that feels a little bit better. And then
what are you hitting to preview back and forth? Sorry for such a basic question, but
that the shortcut for that would be Control D or Command D is disable.
Got it. Cool.
Hey guys, I need to jump off, unfortunately, but I'm gonna watch this after Sam. It's
Octavian, I can't thank you enough. Thank you, sir.
No problem. Time. Thanks so much for setting this up. I'm sure.
No, thank you.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. We'll see you guys later.
Yeah, Octavian.
Peace.
Yeah. And then I kind of will do the base of my look, like the amount of saturation I personally do before my like output LUT, whether that's Bullock's log, Bullock's color, or something else. So let's say we want to go for a pretty bold and saturated look. I will pump that up now, and then.
And how are you pumping that up?
That's just the saturation control down here.
Got it. Yep.
And then, you know, maybe I want a little bit of green in the highlights, so I'll drag that in this way.
What is that split and then coming back together that's happening just before that?
So this is a parallel node, and I do these for windows or like individual adjustments that are going to be shot to shot. So let's say in this particular shot, I want to bring up her face. I think, one second while the footage catches up. I think she starts somewhere else facing camera. Yeah. So,
so it's just two adjustments that you want to make to specific parts of the image, but you could have more if you wanted there.
Yeah, and so you just do that by adding a parallel node with Alt P, and that'll add more. But yeah, those are just kind of from shot to shot. If I want to make any localized adjustments, or what some people call like secondaries, I'll put them there. But I don't necessarily always use those.
Got it.
And then kind of after I've set the base of that look, let's say I think overall the magentas are too saturated, then I kind of make my hue and hue versus saturation adjustments. I kind of bring down that saturation of magenta and red. And that's looking all right. And then I have these two nodes, highlights and shadows. Again, I don't always touch them, but they're there because I know often enough I want to make like fine adjustments across a grade in the shadows. And so the benefit of working in this kind of fixed node structure that always has this outline is that I can kind of jump from shot to shot. And let's say I want to copy the saturation adjustment, and I'm going to desaturate a lot more this time.
Mm-hmm.
I jump to the next one, and I just paste, and it's already going to jump to the same node and be in the right spot.
Your paste will paste it to the right spot in that structure.
Mm-hmm. And I guess one important setting to have is have it say switching clips selects the same node.
Got it.
And
And
then
if the clip
there's
doesn't
another.
have that node, if it doesn't have that node, it'll just go to some other node.
So yeah, for example, let's say I reset this. If I start at node 3 here and then jump to this, it'll go to node 1
Got it.
because there's no node 3, and then it goes back to node 1 here because it's following the same numbers.
Okay. And so then after you do your specific, so you just added saturation in the base and then removed it in the hue curve.
Yeah, so the base is just kind of the base will look like how saturated I want to go overall with the whole image. Do I want to push it a little bit more yellow, a bit more blue, a bit more green? I'm going to do that in the base of my look. But then if there's certain colors specifically that I want to increase or decrease saturation, I'll do that in this kind of hue curve.
Got it.
Because that
And
might vary
then
from shot to shot. And so if
right, right,
I
right.
want the overall base look of the entire piece to be a bit yellow, that's great. But then maybe there's a few shots where there's like some water in the background and that blue is too saturated. So I want to decrease the saturation there. But then in other shots, she's wearing like a blue dress and I don't want to pull that out. If I separate that hue adjustment to a separate node, I can copy that across shot to shot. Whereas if I add that into my base look, then I can't necessarily copy that across every shot in the project that I need to.
Right, right. No,
Um,
that's cool. And so then you do specifically rather than secondary corrections, you're now doing just stuff for the highlights, stuff for the shadows
mm-hmm.
after that point, and then you're going down to your overall contrast, right?
Yeah. And then I personally kind of deal with blacks after my LUT or contrast is added. So right now we're kind of sitting a little bit above 0 on the waveform. And if I just bring that down a little bit, and you'll notice I'm kind of sitting above 0 by the same amount every time. And so if I copy that across, then my black is going to be sitting at the same spot.
Right.
But the issue is, or the issue can come up where if I start getting crazy with how I'm making my contrast adjustments early on, and I do contrast adjustments early on and not just exposure, then, if I'm bringing my shadows down here, it's not necessarily going to have the same black point because I went a little bit too crazy early on.
Okay, got it.
And then another really kind of powerful feature of the fixed node structure is there's a command that you can do called ripple node changes to selected clips. So let's say I go here and I boost the saturation again. I can, whatever the last adjustment I made is, can be rippled across to everything else. So I'm going to select everything and then say ripple node changes to selected clips. And now you'll see that the saturation is the same.
Right.
Because it's just doing the last adjustment on the same node across every selected clip.
So anything specifically, it sounds like the big takeaway for you specifically about the D16 is that you don't necessarily just want to do the accepted D16 in and out. You can also work in a space that's more widely supported and has more things kind of built for it as a starting point, like
Yeah,
Array
totally.
Log.
Like, if I was working with an Alexa, I'm not necessarily going to use the Alexa Log C to Rec 709 lot every time, because ultimately what that is like a manufacturer provided one size fits all, unstylized base starting point. and that's useful sometimes. Like maybe a commercial, I don't really want it to be that stylized, so maybe I'll use the Rec 709 LUT as my starting point. But ultimately, when it comes down to color, there is no one size fits all. Like every project calls for, different ideas and different looks. And so the Bolex log to Bolex color is kind of similar to that log C to Rec 709 LUT, where it's a manufacturer provided kind of rule of thumb. This gets it in a good spot, but it's not the only spot or the best spot for this project. It's just kind of a starting point.
Yeah. And I think we've pretty well covered everything, right?
Yeah, I'd say so. I guess another thing that I might say is it's pretty common these days to see projects that are using like film prints, emulation LUTs, and I would say that would be kind of another good thing to explore with people's Bolex workflows, because a lot of us have this camera because we feel it looks kind of filmic, and film prints are another kind of thing that can quickly make your footage look pretty filmic because it has that cooler shadows, the warmer highlights, and the way it adjusts colors, especially kind of like greens and skin tones, feels very familiar to those of us who are used to looking at film.
And that's and for that you would start with the Bolex log and then apply one ordinary log, but then apply a film look.
Instead of a Bolex log to a Bolex color. And
Are there any film emulators that you like better than others?
So I mean, I'm not talking about like Film Convert and all that, but I have mixed feelings about those. But
no, I mean these LUTs, these looks.
So yeah, I mean, I rarely use the Fuji ones. They just don't work for me in terms of the way they handle shadows and skin tones. The shadows always go a bit green and the skin tones always feel a bit yellow. I mean, if you look at the stuff that Fuji films, 35 millimeter stills, all the film options they sell, they behave pretty similarly. Like Superior has green shadows and a bit more yellow skin tones. So I personally favor Kodak. And the only differences between these three are the white points. So D65 is going to be your average, like normal white point. It looks white. Your monitor, your MacBook, or whatever monitor you're looking at, your TV, are almost always set to 6500 Kelvin as their white balance or color temperature. So if you set it to a D55 film print, it's automatically going to feel warmer than what you're used to.
And these are built into Resolve.
Correct.
Yeah.
So if I go the D65, the highlights here feel, they feel white, but then if I go D55, it feels way warmer. I think the D55 can look really nice frequently, especially like outside, golden hour, or just sunny days. It looks amazing.
And would you use that as to replace the Bolex color on the end of that chain and then do your stuff before there, or how would you work with if you were just dropping in a film look?
Yeah, so the film look would kind of be my base starting point for the overall look. So that would replace the Bolex log to Bolex color. This is going to be the contrast curve that everything goes through. Every clip is going to be hitting the same LUT. So I want, it's kind of the base. And so I'd say overall, like, it's pretty saturated, or not saturated, pretty contrasty. So I might kind of dial back the opacity of this node with the key output, maybe set it to like 0.8 or so.
Like you can just reduce the amount that node is affecting the whole thing.
Yeah.
Okay. And then remind me, where did you put the Bolex color in that chain? Where is the Bolex color applied?
Right now, it's just the Bolex log LUT, but there is no Bolex color LUT.
You never put the color in, but if you were going to put it in, where would it go?
Still here as well.
Right there?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
And then I'd say these film prints usually look pretty bad until you add a good bit of saturation into them. Um, and I honestly feel like this still feels too contrasty, so I'm gonna pull back on contrast. Sorry, I'm so used to working with the color grading panel I have that I'm gonna, if I make adjustments and you're not seeing where they happen, I'll
It's fine. No, it's
yeah.
fine. It's good. And by the way, like I don't, which panel do you use?
I have the Blackmagic Mini panel.
Okay, cool. And you love it?
Oh, absolutely. It's I see how it feels like it's really expensive for anybody that is doing this like kind of casually, but for me, somebody that's this is like what I'm doing for a living, it's definitely
Of
paid for
course.
itself a few times over and helps me work way faster, which is ultimately like time is money.
Right.
So just kind of dialing back the the
Have you ever
contrast.
seen anybody use like the smaller things like the loop deck and those things for
I
color
haven't
grading or
seen a
no?
loop deck for Resolve. I've always thought that they're really cool for Lightroom and all that.
Yeah.
Um, it was always funny to me to hear photographers talking about this little control keyboard costing $300 and being like way too expensive because it's just new to them and they're not
Right.
used to having a surface to work with. But
Yeah.
like if you ask any colorist, almost all of them are going to say, yeah, like a control surface is so worth it because it makes my work faster. And like
Yeah.
to
It's like
me,
if you're a writer, you're gonna want a keyboard, you know?
yeah,
Like this is
exactly.
yeah.
Like it's $400, sure, for a loop deck, but the amount of time you'll save, being able to make multiple adjustments at once or having a tactile feel rather than like, oh, my mouse slipped a little bit too far, let me like overcorrect, um, is so worth it to me. Um, so I think once photographers get used to like working that way, they would agree that it's definitely worth it. But whatever.
Oh, and they have a micro panel now too.
Yeah, the micro is great too. The main difference is just that it doesn't have some of the access to like the secondary adjustments, like the curves and the qualifier and the windows, which I'm regularly using. But they have like all of the primary adjustments, and I just really like kind of having a tactile feel while working. So
Yeah,
if
totally.
people can, I would say go for it, but it is a little bit pricey.
For sure.
Um, I wish I had better clips right now to kind of show you
No,
guys.
it's all good. This is look, this is I think understanding the workflow and making it more approachable to like get started. Cause look, the other day I was messing around DaVinci because I got my digital Bolex a few months ago, and I'd be curious why you gave yours up, but uh I got mine and uh I'm just not in DaVinci, and I was in DaVinci and like Command Z wasn't even like I would do something and my whole image would turn to crap, and then I couldn't undo it, and I was like, that's where I was at with the software. And I'm like a software guy, like I love software, I use it for a lot
Yeah,
of things, but it's a little intimidating.
yeah. And so just to kind of quickly demo, like this is Bolex log, Bolex color. Those are the only adjustments on there right now. Besides that black point thing. And so if we compare that to like that film emulation LUT that I was just showing you, film print emulation, like they have some different tendencies, and I pulled a lot of contrast out of the film print one, but I kind of like the way that this feels a bit more. And there's not to say like one isn't more right than the other. It's just subjective.
And
Um,
how are you switching between those two really fast?
so I grabbed the film print emulation as a still, and I'm just kind of going back and forth between the stills.
Got it.
And then I could always just go back and apply that grade if I wanted.
That's cool.
Um, I don't know. I think
Yeah.
that's kind of my run through of a general kind of color workflow. Like this is how I work, regardless of working with the Bolex or not. I use this kind of fixed node structure, and You know, I'm frequently working under film print LUT. Other times I'm kind of building my own LUTs depending on the project. And this just kind of makes it easy to jump around. And I always know every time I jump into a new project, I know what nodes are doing what because I put them in the same place every project. And it's just easy to be like familiar with what you're, and you don't get confused going from clip to clip.
Totally. No, it's awesome. And so real quick, but before we go, if you have like 2 minutes, I'd just be curious, why did you why don't you have your digital bullets anymore?
So I sold it, I guess maybe like a year and a half ago. Because frankly, like I at one point was most interested in cinematography, and then I bought the digital Bullets, and I had to learn Resolve because it's the tool of choice for proper color stuff, and that's kind of what started me off into color was getting a digital Bullets before I wanted to be a cinematographer. Um, but I was shooting less and less and grading more and more. Um, and so the camera wasn't getting that much use from me. I only really used it as like a vacation camera to document with friends and family. And it was getting used a lot more by my friends on their like passion projects than it was by me.
Right.
And it just didn't really make sense to keep holding on to. Because while I love the camera, it's not a super cheap camera.
No.
And if I'm only going to use it once or twice a year, it just didn't make sense to keep holding on to a $4,000 or $3,000 camera. So
Fair enough. But you still love it.
yeah, still love it. Would still love to keep being involved with the community some and working on projects here and there. And then I replaced it with an analog original Bolex H16, and I figured, yeah, I'm gonna have to spend money on film, but if I'm only shooting 1 or 2 rolls a year, like
Yeah.
$100 here or there is going to take a lot longer to add up to the full cost of that Bolex. So
Totally. And I have an H16 too. I love it. I love it so much.
mm-hmm.
And yeah, you put, I don't know if you've done this. If I'm going to somebody's wedding who I don't know anybody else at the wedding, I'll just bring 100 feet of film and I'll shoot some stuff around the wedding. And then that's my wedding gift. And it's always their favorite wedding gift. So it's
That's
like,
smart. I'm gonna remember that for when I have wedding season coming up because I'm like not quite at that age where all my friends are
no,
getting
it's,
married, but
it's,
5 years down the
it's,
road.
it's super helpful because it gives you something to do and people think you're cool and they come up and talk to you and like you have something to talk about, and you can just, and you're the hero because you've given them like the best document. There's video people there or whatever, but like what you give them is way cooler than what they did. So
That's smart. That's really smart. I'm definitely gonna pull that one out of my sleeve.
well, thank you so much. This was super helpful. I am now going to be good with DaVinci. I'm going to dive in. I don't think I'm going to become a colorist, but I will color my own stuff and I will pay a little more attention now that I know that it is approachable. So
Yeah, and I'm sorry, it's not like I had a speech or anything prepared, so it's sometimes tough for me to kind of run through the way I work because I think sometimes my hands work faster than my
of
mouth,
course.
my brain,
No,
especially
look, for
when
the
I know exactly what I'm doing, but putting it in like layman's terms or can be a little tougher. So I'm happy to answer like any questions anybody has after the fact. Um,
for sure.
and yeah, I mean,
And
I would just say, be comfortable experimenting. Like there are lots of ways to work. Um, and the Bullets log and Bullets color are great, but there's a lot more to be explored.
well, thanks. Was there anything I should have asked you about or anything else?
I guess the last thing I'll mention is I know some people are kind of curious about doing like color management inside of Resolve. Um, and to be honest, I would have kind of avoided it. I think it's gotten a lot better in this next version that they're working on, Resolve 17. I'm still on 16 because I want to make sure like when I'm doing this day in and day out that I'm on something that's stable. I'm not going to crash on me, but the tools are mapped to work in one way. in Resolve 16 and before. And when you start kind of changing the timeline color space, they should kind of change how they behave, but they don't. And I think in Resolve 17 they start behaving differently depending on which color space you're in. That way, no matter what timeline or working space you're in, they feel similar in terms of the results that you get. But prior to this newest version of Resolve, you're going to get different results using the same tools, depending on what color space you're in.
Got it. So just stay on your, just stay
Yeah,
in your,
I would say just leave your timeline as Rec 709.
because it's not forward, it's not like future proof. Otherwise, they'll change their color science again.
Yeah, a little bit. And it honestly just kind of makes things more complicated. Like, color management is important on high-end projects if you're like going into theaters or if you need to output for HDR and stuff. But other than that, like, and I've worked at post houses before that, you know, are working on high-end commercials and stuff, and like they work the same way that I'm working. You just start from scratch. You're not working with color management. Yeah, it's just not important unless you're working for multiple deliverables for like webs, screen, theaters, you know, all that kind of stuff.
All right. Well, Sam, thank you. This was cool.
I wish I could be a bit more succinct and straightforward with how I explain things, but sometimes it's
No. The 14 people over the next 5 years who are going to get something out of this are going to appreciate it, and they're going to be willing to go through the whole thing because they want to know this. So yeah, thank you.
To answer any questions. So
of course. Thanks, Sam.
yeah, gladly. Have a nice afternoon. See ya.
You too. Peace.